And so at Living Beyond Limits, as people, the members, the essence of Living Beyond Limits, we stand in and we stand for love and compassion and kindness. Yes? Because when we stand in and stand for love and compassion and kindness, we make a better world. We create a world that is more just and a world that is more connected, a world of greater unity when we come from love and kindness and compassion. But sometimes we forget to stand for love and kindness and compassion for ourselves. We remember to be kind and loving and compassionate out in the world because that's a part of our spiritual path. And we're conscious of the fact that that's part of our spiritual path. But we forget that we are part of that equation. We forget to treat ourselves with that same kind of kindness. And so the title of my talk today is Heaven or Hell. And really, what I'm talking about is that we, each one of us, has the power to create heaven around us and within us, or to create hell swirling around us and within us. Do you know that? And so, one of the ways that we create either heaven or hell inside of us is through our internal dialogue. So in class this week, we're teaching self-mastery class. One of the questions that we answered and talked about was, how do you create heaven? And how do you create hell? And some of the responses were, I create hell when I criticize myself and give myself a hard time. Somebody else said, when I let someone down, and then I give myself a hard time, and then I have this ongoing dialogue in my head that, why did I do such and such, or why didn't I do such and such? I should have, da-da-da, fill in the blank, and then I feel guilty. Somebody else said, when I experience something, and then I keep rehashing it in my mind over and over again. Or when I worry about the past, or when I worry about the future, or when I just keep chewing on something that was negative. Can you relate to any of those experiences? And don't you feel like you create hell inside of yourself when you do that? Every single answer that came up about how do you create hell had to do with the fact that we create it in our minds and that we create it through our self-talk, through our inner dialogue. That we create hell within ourselves by the story that we make up about what happened, by the story that we tell ourselves about what it means, and by the story that we make up about what it means about us. And so there's a story that I wanted to share with you, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, a psychology professor walked around on a stage while teaching stress management principles to an auditorium filled with students. As she raised a glass of water, everyone expected that they be asked the typical question, glass half empty or half full. Instead, with a smile on her face, the professor asked, how heavy is this glass of water I'm holding? Students shouted out answers ranging from 8 ounces to a couple of pounds. She replied, from my perspective, the absolute weight of the glass of water doesn't matter. It depends how long I hold it. If I hold it for a minute or two, it's fairly light. If I hold it for an hour straight, its weight might make my arm ache a little. If I hold it for a day straight, my arm will likely cramp and feel completely numb and paralyzed, forcing me to drop the glass to the floor. In each case, the weight of the glass doesn't change, but the longer I hold it, the heavier it feels to me. The longer we keep rehashing and keep retelling that story and keep retelling ourselves how bad or wrong or flawed we are, the heavier it gets and the more it feels like hell inside of us. Because if you think about it, whatever the situation was that happened, it was over in a minute. But a week later, days later, a week later, we're still going over it in our minds. But all of those answers about how we create hell had to do with the commentary that's going on in our heads. And have you noticed that you have an ongoing commentary all of the time? That as you walk around the world, everything that you see and everything that you experience, there's a running commentary about all of it. That is called self-talk. And that commentary about self-talk is how we see things and what it means to us and how we're experiencing things. There is just a narrative that goes along with it. But you might also notice that quite often that narrative is not neutral. Quite often that narrative is either positive or negative. It is either raises our vibration or it lowers our vibration. It is either life-affirming or it's life-depleting. You know, the first therapist that I went to when I was like in my late 20s, and we were talking about, I was so judgmental at that point in my life. I judged every single thing that I saw, everything that I did, every person that I met. And she told me that she didn't do that. That instead the comment that went on in her head was, isn't that interesting? And that was like a whole new concept to me. And you know, as a natural result of me doing the inner work that I've done, that is exactly what I do today. All the time I'm saying out loud to myself, isn't that interesting? Or isn't that fascinating? I'm seldom in judgment about what I see in the world. But I know it wasn't that long ago I went to visit my mom in Portland. And we were sitting in a restaurant, and this man came in and sat down at a booth next to us, and he had on an army jacket and dyed black hair that was spiked and sticking up and piercings in his face. And my mom goes, oh my God, that is so awful. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, isn't that fascinating when I look at him? It's fascinating. I wonder what his life is and what his thinking is and what creates this. And there's no judgment. I don't have judgment. But boy, when it comes to ourselves, it's a totally different story, don't you think? That ongoing narrative is almost always positive or negative. So there's really two kinds of self-talk. There's a self-talk that we have about the world and what it is that we see, and then there's a self-talk to ourselves about ourselves. And so that self-talk is almost always either approving or disapproving. We say, good job, you did a good job on that one. It's either encouraging or it's distressing, and we say, you are a winner, or what the hell were you thinking? What are you, stupid? We go on and on and on. What is wrong with you? To ourselves, that narrative. And we know in the teachings of the science of mind, it teaches that our thoughts create our experience. Our thoughts create our feelings, and then the tone of those thoughts and those feelings and those emotions, the tendency of them draws to us experiences and people and things that match that vibration, that match that feeling tone, that match those feelings. In the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes says, since we are thinking beings and cannot stop thinking, and since the creative mind receives our thought and cannot stop creating, it must always be creating something for us. What it will create depends wholly upon what we are thinking, and what we shall attract will depend upon that which our thoughts dwell, because like attracts like. And so I don't know about you, but I want to experience peace. Yeah? I think we all want to experience peace and to have a sense of well-being and a sense of ease in our lives. We want to be productive because when we're productive, we feel really fulfilled. So we want to live a fulfilling life, and we want to have loving relationships. The problem is, sometimes we're not really paying attention. We want to experience those things, and it all begins with our self-talk. It all begins with what we're telling ourselves, how we're speaking to ourselves, what that content is. Ernest Holmes says, teachings of science of mind teach that heaven and hell aren't places, but instead they are states of being or states of consciousness. And so Ernest Holmes says that heaven is a state of happiness. Heaven is within. If we abide in the divine, and it abides in us in harmony, in power, in peace, and in wisdom, we live in a heavenly place. When we are in harmony, when we are in peace, we create that sense of heaven inside of ourselves. The truth is that God is always for us. And the truth is also that God can only do for us what God can do through us. And when our thoughts are filled with negativity and with judgment and with regret and with self-condemnation, we block that good that we desire from flowing into our lives because it doesn't match our vibration. And we block that flow of good that we desire coming into our lives because subconsciously, when we're giving ourselves a hard time, we think we don't deserve it. And we're not even conscious of that. And then we wonder why we don't have that loving relationship that we want. Or then we wonder why things aren't working at our place of work, or why we don't have that dream job. Or we wonder why we don't have peace in our homes, or peace in our places of work, or peace in the world, when we have this war going on inside of ourselves. The problem is that we aren't paying attention to what's going on inside of our minds. We aren't paying attention to what we're thinking. You know, I know that we all live inside of our thoughts so much that we identify with them, that we somehow think that thinking, that activity of thinking, is who we are. We don't recognize that we aren't our thinking, that there's a thinker of the thoughts. You aren't your thoughts. And so just for a moment, notice what you're thinking right now. Maybe you even notice, I'm not really thinking anything now. But the fact that you can notice means you aren't those thoughts. The fact that you can notice means that you are separate from those thoughts. That who's noticing those thoughts? That's who you are. You are the observer of your thoughts. They are something that is an activity of the brain, but you are observing this activity that's going on. You are the being that is having these thoughts. And so if we want to live with a sense of peace and well-being, we must pay attention to our thinking. We must pay attention to the content of our thought. We must be mindful. That's what mindfulness is about. It's paying attention to what we're thinking and what we're feeling. But in order to pay attention, you have to be able to step back and look at it, not be in the thinking. So it takes a practice of just a little bit of removal in order to be able to watch your thoughts and to notice them. Because what happens is when we pay attention to our thinking and our thoughts, we are then empowered to choose. We can choose this thought we're having, or we can choose something else. We can choose thinking that we've done and grew up with and have done our entire lives, or we can step out of it and use affirmations or shift to something else. We can do that with our thinking and our feeling. And when you actually realize that and actually do it, it is so empowering to realize you can shift that. When we pay attention, we are at choice. We can choose thoughts that are peaceful. We can choose thoughts that support us. We can choose thoughts that give us confidence. We can choose thoughts that are powerful and that support us in creating the life of our desires. In the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes also says, lifelong habits of wrong thinking can be consciously and deliberately neutralized, and an entirely new order of mental and emotional reaction established in mind. Merely to abstain from wrong thinking is not enough. There must be active right thinking. We can't just not think a thought anyway. You have to replace something else. If I say think of a monkey, and now I tell you stop thinking of the monkey, you can't do it. You have to replace it something else. Think of an elephant, and now you're no longer thinking about the monkey. You have to replace the negative thoughts with something else. And so in The Art of Being, Dennis Merritt Jones tells a story that I'd like to share with you. He says, one morning I stepped out onto my second-story balcony and noticed that one of the herbal flower boxes had become host to one of the largest weeds I'd ever seen in captivity. We're talking a major league weed here, as large as a rose bush. I probably could have pruned it and kept it as my prize plant. So large was this weed that it had taken over the entire box, choking out the fragile herbs recently planted by my wife. I thought to myself, how on earth could a weed like this become rooted in a second-story flower box and then grow to this proportion? The answer to how it got there is simple. Either the seed of the weed somehow became commingled with the herbal seeds, a bird dropped it, or perhaps the wind simply blew it into the flower box. Regardless of how it got there, it is no longer there. I lovingly transplanted it into the recycling bin, where, in short, its offspring shall find residence in a landfill somewhere. How it grew as large as a Volkswagen before it was discovered and removed is simple, too. No one had tended to the flower box for several weeks. Potting soil is incredibly receptive to any seeds introduced into it, as are our minds, yes? It has absolutely no discretion when it comes to playing hosts to seeds. It says yes to all of them. The point, an unattended flower box in March can mean unseen havoc for your daffodils. So this is also with your mind. An unattended mind can create havoc for you because your mind is amazingly receptive to whatever suggestions are dropped into it. The action you and I need to take is clear. Plant thought seeds about yourself and others that are rooted in reverence and loving kindness. Plant seeds that focus on God's presence at the center and circumference of all that you say, think, and do, at work, home, or play. Be mindful. Be skillful of the seeds you plant and how you nurture them. Your life is your garden. Keep the weeds out, because this is one way in which you can personally beautify the world. You owe that much to yourself and to those who receive benefit of the seeds you drop along the way. And so I invite you to close your eyes for a second. He says, if you notice any pattern of thinking from which weeds will grow or are currently growing, simply visualize yourself plucking the thought weed from your mind and immediately plant a seed thought that supports the idea of wholeness. Follow it with an affirmation, such as divine mind knows how to grow a beautiful life by means of me, and I am grateful. So I invite you to bring to mind something that you have recently or maybe even currently are giving yourself a hard time for. That thing that you keep rehashing. And imagine that that thing is a very large weed that has been in our brain. And now, see yourself pulling it and walking that weed that's in your hand over to the recycling bin and dropping it in. And as you stand there and you look down at that weed that is now no longer in your mind or in your brain, but instead is in that recycling bin, I want you to take a new seed and to place it in that space where that weed had been. It needs to be something that is neutral and factual. Maybe something like mistakes are part of the learning process, or mistakes are how I grow, or even it's okay to make mistakes. So plant that seed in your mind. And now I invite you to open your eyes. So you know I love to give you a tool every week, something to be able to do when you go home. I invite you to do that when you find yourself having that repetition, when you find yourself caught in that negative loop, to pull it out like a weed and to go put it in the recycling bin and to plant a new seed. And then to follow it with some sort of affirmation that is loving and kind to yourself. Maybe something like, life entirely supports my thriving. whatever it is that works for you. And so my invitation to you this week is to be mindful. Pay attention to your thinking. Pay attention to the contents of your thought, your self-talk. And catch yourself when you start rehashing something in your mind that isn't productive, something that doesn't raise your vibration but instead is lowering your vibration. Catch yourself. Catch yourself when you start criticizing yourself, when you start berating yourself, when you start giving yourself a hard time. And when you do, close your eyes, see that thought as that weed, pull it out, take it to the trash, put a new seed in that is something that supports you in your thriving. And something neutral, because sometimes when we're in the midst of giving ourselves a hard time and we replace it with something positive, that part of mind goes, oh, no, that's not true. So if you just replace it with something neutral, like mistakes are okay, or even I am safe right now, but replace it with something, and if you need to forgive yourself, and then love yourself. Treat yourself with that same love and kindness and compassion that you practice out in the world with the other people that you meet in your life. That part that is your spiritual practice because it's part of your path. Practice that with yourself. Treat yourself as you would a friend. Friends like you treat yourself, that person wouldn't be your friend anymore. Self as you would your friend, and choose thoughts that are loving and supportive. Don Miguel Ruiz, in his book, The Four Agreements, says life can be very easy when love is your way of life. Life can be really easy when love is your way of life, whether it's with other people or with yourself. A Course in Miracles distinguishes between sin and error. It says a sin requires punishment, but errors simply require correction. The Course goes on to tell us that we have made many errors, but we have never sinned. All our sins, self-inflicted nonsense, are undone the moment we bring our judgmental thoughts into the healing light of love. That's all we need to do, is bring our judgmental thoughts about ourselves into that healing light of love, to love ourselves. The entire universe wants you to flourish. The entire universe wants you to flourish. The divine wants you to live this life and to express with absolute freedom. Freedom to create the life of your desires, freedom to live your life fully, freedom to be at peace. And when we choose only thoughts that are loving, when you choose only thoughts that are life-supporting, then you'll be creating heaven inside of yourself. Then you'll be free to be who you've come here to be. Then you'll be creating your best life. And so blessings to every single one of you on this path of awakening to your own divinity and to your own spiritual magnificence. Welcome to this path where mindfulness is part of that practice and part of that process. And welcome to just waking up to the beauty of who you are. Blessings to each and every single one of you. And so I invite you to join me in an affirmative prayer. And so we take our attention from this material world and turn it into that invisible presence. That one invisible presence that is everywhere present. That is life itself. That presence that is love and wisdom and good without bounds. That presence that was before time began, that fills everything with itself. For everything in this world is brimming with that divine presence. Everything is permeated with that infinite love intelligence, including us. For that divine presence is the very essence of our spirit. That divine presence is the very essence of our own beingness. And that means that the very core of who we are is love. That the very core essence of who we are is wholeness. And it is beauty. And it is power. And it is one with everything and everyone. One with that infinite potentiality of the universe. One with that boundless good that is the nature of that one. And so today we step onto this path fully awake, with open minds and open eyes, with observation skills and awareness of our self-talk, of what supports us and what does not support us. And so today, I know that that infinite intelligence is guiding us at every moment to make choices that support us in thriving, to make choices that support us in flourishing, that supports us in making choices that enable us to live our best lives. For this is what we have come here for, to create a magnificent life out of the boundlessness of God. And so it is with a heart filled with gratitude and conviction and authority and knowingness that I claim this for each and every single one of us, because I know it's the truth. And so in that, I release this word into the creative law of the universe, which is none other than the law of our own being. I release this word into the law of our own being, knowing that it unfolds as we say yes. And so I invite you to join me in saying yes, yes. And so I release this prayer, and I say, and so it is.